Now, as we were talking about these things, about your diagramming, there was one thing that we had not covered last time, and that is pages 103 through 106 of the syllabus. And on those pages, there are logical block diagramming rules that give you some instruction. Like number one is, what do you do with adjectives? You do not subordinate the adjectives to the nouns they modify. You will subordinate adjectival clauses, like relative clauses. But just a simple adjective, like Hamelech Hagadol, the great king, don't subordinate Hagadol to Hamelech. Just leave them in the same line. Adverbial phrases, prepositional phrases are primarily adverbial in nature. Those will be subordinated, but remember that you're only going through 3 steps this time, and so you're not going that far for this current diagram. You'll be working on that level for the diagram as you resubmit it for paper number 3. So this is just the beginning of submitting your diagram, and this paper number 2 is submitting your diagram in its first draft with the first 3 steps, and then paper number 3 will be your revision of that. Paper number 4 will be another revision, and we'll just keep revising it until we've got it fully refined in time for your expositional paper at the end of next semester. Notice that apposition on page 103 there at the bottom is diagrammed by utilizing a double arrow, and you can find that double arrow in various fonts on your computer. There's what do you call it? Symbol font, the symbol font, where you have the mathematical symbols and things like that. So use the symbol font or other fonts like the Dingbats fonts. A number of those have various symbols that you can utilize, and especially the double arrow, and that's what's used here. I think that one is from the symbol font. And then on page 104, ultimately, when you get into your literary analysis next semester, if you have chiasms in your text, you'll show the chiasms. You're not required to do that for this first paper on diagrammatical analysis, but eventually you'll be getting to that point. Construct chains are not to be divided. Do not divide construct chains. Do not break them up. Do not put part of it below the other part. Keep them together on the same line. Direct discourse, normally placed within a discourse box, a dialogue box. Direct objects, if they come in their normal position, just leave them there in their normal position on the same line with the verb. We had an example here in Exodus 15:26 where we had to take the direct object and it was placed above, if you remember right, and we tried to show that by means of an arrow, so that as we're looking at this, this is the direct object of this verb, and it's not on the same line because of the word order. Remember, your primary rule is to preserve the word order of the Hebrew text. Do not alter it. If that direct object had occurred in its normal location right here, it would have appeared on this line. In other words, you would have had the negative, the verb, the prepositional phrase modifying the verb, and the direct object would all be on one line in some situations, in a normal situation. And then macrosyntactical markers, watch for them because they will help to start brand new sections. But there's nothing you do with them as far as subordinating. Plays on word, we'll talk about that later on. We're in literary analysis. Repetition. One of the things to watch for in your text is repetition, especially in poetry. And I believe Job 19 is poetry, Psalm 33 is poetry, and Isaiah 1 is poetry. Watch for repetitions and keep that in mind and begin to identify those. There'll come a time when you'll want to mark those in some way. Then there's a section on subordinate clauses, and then on page 106 at the top of the page, the Wayik Tol verbs. Be certain to subordinate Wayik Tol verbs to their lead verb if the lead verb is in your text. If the lead verb is in your text. In the 3 texts you have, I don't think you're going to have that occur, but that'd be something you'd be watching out for. In other words, like in Exodus 15:26, you have a Wayik Tol verb up there. If in this passage as I was diagramming, it also included the lead verb. The lead verb would be on the line before it or earlier, and it would be at the right-hand margin, and the White-Toll verb would be halfway underneath it vertically, because you want to subordinate it to the lead verb. The lead verb governs the entire section. Yes?
But we're not applying any of these rules 1 to 12 to our diagram at the moment.
There are a number of those you will apply, yes. Adverbial phrases you will not, except for those like key clauses, which are adverbial. Adjectives, the share clauses, adjectival clauses, you will apply that. The direct discourse, you'll put a box around it, so number 6 also. Number 7 applies, don't separate the direct objects. Macrosyntactical markers applies if you have one in your text. Watch for it to begin a new section. Subordinate clauses, number 11 applies. And White-Toll verbs apply. Okay? So some of these apply, but be aware those rules are there for you to use and to look at and to have available to help you analyze the text. Okay, any questions on diagramming at this point?
So if I'm hearing you correct, as we make mistakes on this one, we can correct it later.
That's right. Yes, and you might very well make some mistakes on this one, but that's fine. It's not a biggie. All right, and remember on this one, you're to provide 3 steps. So you have 3 different diagrams of your same passage. The first one, remember, is just to center the text like that. That's number 1. And the second one is to go beyond that, get down here. The second one is step number 2. And the third one is step number 3, right there, and you can stop. That's all you need to do. Yes?
For step 2, do we need to do more than just a share and key clauses?
No.
Just those 2?
Just a share and key clauses. Okay? Yes?
For step 1, I had written down while you were speaking, you said adding the verse numbers.
Make certain you always have verse numbers identifying where each verse begins.
Okay, so we just have it next to wherever the text is.
Right, as we did in the sample I did in class from Genesis 3. Okay? All right. Other questions? Yes?
Yeah, can you just touch up again on the format of the paper?
Yes, it's given for you. The formatting is given for you in the syllabus. And that is all given for you on page 9 tells you about the bibliography. Page 10 gives you the instructions about the paper. And then on page 20 in the syllabus, you have the grade sheet that tells you how much each section is worth in points and tells you the order of the paper. Tells you to have a title page as page 1, a translation page for page 2, which is redoing your translation you submitted for paper number 1. And then paper 3 and following is your body, your diagram, and then your bibliography will be your final page. Okay? So it's all there in the syllabus. Yes, sir?
Question about the key and share clauses again.
Yes.
In the syntactical analysis of the Joe passage,
right,
some will say that the key drops out of the first verse, verse 25. There's a key that should be it's a key clause without a key. Would you want to imply that? And then,
if you think it's significant enough to put in, if it's a causal clause, yes, go ahead and subordinate it. You can either put key in square brackets to make it clear what you're doing, okay, or you can just subordinate it without the key. All right? Yes?
The revised translation, that's revised insofar as the diagramming has given us extra insight. Is that the idea?
That's the idea. And you're going to revise that translation again and again with every paper. Let me just summarize some of the things that you've learned in going through this right now. Number 1, you've learned that step 1 is only dividing the lines by disjunctive accents and centering them on the page. Has nothing to do with tables. Step number 2 is where you begin to move it to the right-hand side, working from the right-hand margin, and you begin to show relationships, but primarily in that place you're going to use the key clauses when they are adverbial, not when they're object clauses. And you're going to have a share clauses when they're adjectival subordinated. And that's about it for step 2, unless you have a couple of major divisions that can be made slightly differently because you think maybe something is really not the same margin on the right. But don't sweat it much on step 2. Step 3 is where you really get into those clausal relationships. For example, if you have concessive clauses, in step 2, you have not broken the two parts of the concessive clause apart. They're still all on one line. But in step 3, you want to take the protasis, the eam part of that concessive clause, and leave it on one line and take the then part and put it directly under it, but at the same right-hand margin. And then you also begin, if you're like in Isaiah 1, you've got several paired lines. And you may want to add extra space between the paired lines to show the distinct different concessive clauses. So watch for those things. But step 3 is really looking at clause level changes. Maybe you have a difference in word order. As in Exodus 15:26, when we were working on it, and let me get out of this here and go back to Exodus. I pulled up a lot of things. Remember up here in step 3, I moved this direct object over, but I haven't put an arrow in yet. That's step 4. I've put no color in yet. That's step 4. All I did was clarify the relationship here to show that this is the main line. And so I've moved the direct object over because it's before it here. And up here I haven't clearly distinguished everything, but I do have extra space between the two parts. And I started to distinguish, but it's not finished yet. Do you understand what I'm saying? And step 3 is this one. Question? Yes?
So like the one that I showed you where I'd already started coloring things, should I
That's
put
step
that?
4, actually.
Okay, so should I put that in my paper as step 4? And include
Don't give me step 4 yet.
Okay.
That'll be in paper number 3. Paper number 3 will be step 4. Not step 1, not step 2, and not step 3, but only step 4 will be involved in paper number 3. For this paper, you're only doing the first 3 steps. Okay? So you're not distinguishing like prepositional phrases that are adverbial. Don't start those. That's step 4. All right? Question?
So in a passage like Isaiah where there's just one key and one key, not even one I share in the whole thing, step 2 can look pretty much very similar.
Except it's moved to the right. It's no longer centered. That's what distinguishes step 1 and 2. Step 1 is all centered just by disjunctive accents. Step 2 is bringing everything to the right and showing the share and key clauses. If you don't have them, then you're not going to show them. And then step 3 begins to show clausal relationships. Okay? Yes?
In step 3, do we subordinate prepositional phrases that are acting adverbially to the verbs?
In step 4, we will start working on things like that, not step 3. Okay? So everyone clear on that? Okay. Don't sweat it. You know, if you get it wrong, if you jump too far ahead, you're not going to lose points for that. That's not that's not a big thing. The big thing is that you have your 3 steps clearly indicated, and that you've done the best you can on them, and that you have the paper all in order, that you have a title page that's formal. Remember, you can start putting your names on them now because the rest of them are not portfolio. So put your names on these on the title page, and then your translation, and revise your translation, give your diagram, and then your bibliography. And for the bibliography, remember that if you haven't used any sources, for example, if you haven't looked at Kaiser and his Toward an Exegetical Theology to see what he does with diagramming, if you have looked at him, you include that in your bibliography at the end of paper number 2. But otherwise, you just have all the same sources you had for paper number 1. Okay, because your bibliographies are going to be cumulative. You add to them. You don't leave out paper number 1 when you come to paper number 2. You just keep adding as you add sources as you go through. All right? This paper may not have any footnotes in it because there's not much to footnote. In fact, there's no reason really to footnote in this paper. So you're just doing the diagram there in the main body.